Hello, everybody. This is Kirk Kilgrave for the Kilgrave Corner, where horror authors talk horror. And today, my guest is J.R. Erickson, she actually offers up the name Jackie for us, at least on her website. So I'm going to be calling her Jackie today. Jackie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, as we were talking right before we started recording, I mentioned that I owned a couple books by you from your Northern Michigan Asylum series. And I do have some questions for you on that series. First off, it takes place again in Northern Michigan, an asylum. You said that it was only 15 minutes away from your home, and that, let's see, so far you've written 8 books in the series. I think it's done, right?
It is. Yep.
Okay.
There's books in the series and it's done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, and also in an interview, I read that you had done a tour of this place. So what can you tell us about what you experienced if you were inside? I know you were outside, but were you inside at all too?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So the asylum, it's called the Grand Traverse Commons now. And I live a little further away from it. I'm more like a half hour away now because I'm on the far eastern side of Traverse City. But when they do a tour, so there's this huge building that's called Building 50, and that was kind of the primary building when it was an asylum, and it's in this Kirkbride architecture, and they've completely restored it to its original grandeur.
Huh.
It's beautiful. But then there are a lot of other buildings that they have left dilapidated, basically. And so they take you through both of them. They take you into the old buildings where, it's cement floors and graffiti and peeling paint, and then they take you
Huh.
into the new. It's really amazing. Like, it's a really amazing experience to go, and they do twilight tours. You can go and peruse it at night and get a chill. It's really neat.
So did you actually get a chill? Did you feel any, strangeness, any creepiness going on in there?
I didn't have. I mean, one thing, you're in a tour, you're in a group of people. Um, I will say I've gone on a couple of the tours now. I did take a bunch of photos at one of them, and myself and I think a friend of mine, we sort of snuck up the stairs. You're supposed to stay in these, tour approved areas, and we snuck up the stairs to the second floor, and we heard something at the end of the hall, and we didn't see anything. It might have been, for all we know, someone renovating, but I took pictures, just kind of reached my hand out and took pictures of the rooms. And then later, when I looked through them, there was one room on the second floor, like the picture just seemed distorted and weird a little bit to me. And I remember showing it to my husband and saying, like, look at this. Doesn't this picture look creepy to you? And he was like, yeah. I mean, but I tend to notice those things more than he would. He's someone who's gonna write it off. So
Hmm.
but but there are a lot of people who have had some very, in fact, my mother-in-law isn't even very comfortable going to the former asylum because she just gets a really kind of a negative vibe from it, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I didn't have any, strong paranormal experience there.
Okay. Yeah, I went to Alcatraz probably about 10 years ago, and they often say that, since people died in there, that,
Yeah,
other people feel things or sense things or see things. I didn't feel anything or see anything or hear anything. So,
yeah,
um, maybe it was the time of the day. I don't know. But
yeah,
yeah, it's crazy though, because and I had to say that word, for real crazy, because it is a mental institution. And like you said, some people aren't comfortable going there because this is where a lot of the people who were insane went. Maybe not all of them, but probably a very,
yeah,
very big majority of them. So yeah, it would send shivers, I think, if it was a little bit creepy and you sense something. So,
yeah.
but it's
It
awesome that
does.
you took pictures though, because then you can relate back to those and, in your novels and so forth.
Yes, yeah, and I don't go there as often now, but I used to live in downtown Traverse City, so I was 2 miles away from this place, and I went there all the time. I mean, there are, I don't know how big the woods are behind it, but probably 100 acres, maybe more than that, of woods filled with trails that you can walk, up these hills through these really dense woods. There's a place back there called the hippie tree. It's
Hmm.
apparently it was like a giant weeping willow that got struck by lightning at some point, and it's lying now on its side, but the local teenagers essentially have claimed this area and graffitied it. So my son, he calls it the painted trees. He's 5, and we'll go hike back there. And it's covered in graffiti, but they've also nailed pictures of their dead friends into the trees. So
Wow.
like, yeah, like pictures of friends that have been, killed in car accidents, but it has a history, and I don't know where this comes from, but it has this lore that it's a portal to hell. And one of the
Hmm.
first times I ever went hiking out there, I was out there alone. I had a friend that showed it to me, and that's how I found it. And because I wasn't from Traverse City, and I was hiking out there alone, and I came upon this older couple who were very strange looking, and in fact they kind
Hmm.
of creeped me out at the time. They looked like meth addicts. That's what I thought of.
Hmm.
I for lack of a better explanation, or description. And they said to me, do you know where the hippie tree is? And I had no idea what they were talking about. I'd never heard of a hippie tree. And then I ended up looking it up online at some later point and reading articles about it being a portal to hell. And I just remember that was a weird experience to have out there. But that's just the woods behind the asylum. And then the asylum itself is this huge sprawling space where you can walk, in the buildings, amongst the buildings. I mean, we've had picnics out there on the grass. It's beautiful and
Wow.
strange and creepy. It's awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Otherwise I would have felt bad. I was thinking creepy to have picnics out there. So I'm glad you
It
said that. I
is.
don't feel so bad now.
Yeah. It's
All right.
all of
So,
the above.
oh, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
No, I just said it's all of the above. It's beautiful and it's creepy. Like
Hmm.
that's
Beautifully creepy. There it is.
beautifully creepy. Exactly.
So, one of the things I do whenever I look to hopefully interview people is to try to check out what I can about them online. Look at their books on Amazon, on Goodreads. I went to your website and I told you that I'd read a number of your blog posts over the past years and so forth. And number one, you've done a great job with your website.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
so what I noticed, however, of course, is it's really interesting how you've taken a like I don't know, I'm not sure the yin and yang type thing, but you actually communicate a lot with your readers and encourage them to send in true paranormal stories that basically I'm guessing might have helped, spring some inspiration into the stories for your Northern Asylum novels. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like there's so many ideas, and I think we all probably get ideas from everywhere, but excuse me. I don't know when it was, a year, 2 years ago. I would have readers sending me stories periodically, and I thought, you know what, it would be
Huh.
kind of cool to ask them to send me their stories and then kind of do a contest. So if you send me your story and I choose the story to weave into a book, then I will put you in the acknowledgments. I'll write the story into the book, and then I'll send you a signed copy of the book. And I had a reader that did that, and he had a really kind of an eerie story of driving late at night with some friends home from a concert, and he wasn't the driver. I think he was the passenger, looking through the windshield and seeing this African American man in a like powder blue tuxedo walk directly in front of the car. And he kind of threw up his hands like, oh my gosh, slam on the brakes. We're about to hit this guy. And the guy just sort of floated up over the windshield. And he, I mean, like looked into this man's eyes, but they clearly weren't hitting him. It was more like an apparition. And he sent me that story, and I still remember reading the email and kind of getting a chill, and I was like, okay, that's the one. I didn't know how it would work in the book, but I knew that was the story because I had a reaction to it.
I had a reaction to it, even though I already read that blog post. I had a reaction with goosebumps on my arms just by you telling me again, even though I
Right.
read it, last week or something like that. And I think one of the
Yeah.
reasons I responded so much to it was because being from Chicago, I know exactly where this person was talking about. Lakeshore Drive
Oh,
down Route 64. So yeah, I know
oh,
exactly. It just made it seem, and a lot of these readers of yours do a very good job in writing the scenes. So I mean, it's
oh,
like, yeah, they're not like putting in superfluous, points that don't really relate to the story that they're telling. It's actually pretty good. So maybe you have some real writers among your readers. Who knows?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Now,
And
when
it's
you,
so
oh,
intriguing.
yeah, yeah. So it's interesting to me that you weave these, like small scenes, vignettes, whatever you want to call them, into your story. At first, I thought maybe you use that as like an inspiration. Oh, maybe I can jump off on this. But I'm glad to hear that you actually have come up with, background story with different characters and plots and so forth. Because otherwise, these guys would be like, "Hey, she took my story and just made $1 million," even though you're not making $1 million, I
Yeah,
know.
no, no,
But
no. Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like you can add just about anything to, that once you have the foundation or the heart of the novel, you can work almost anything into it. Ideally you want it to flow with the themes and the characters. And in that case, it really didn't. Actually, I did a call for stories again this year with the hopes of maybe putting something into my latest release, which was Darkness Stirring. And it just, none of them
hmm,
resonated with the story. So I still have them. We'll see if they make it into the one I'm writing now. I don't know, but
that's
they have to
great.
work.
Yeah, that's just great. You and checking in with your readers, because I know you sometimes ask for cover reveal, not cover reveals, but more like, what do you think of this cover and so forth.
Yeah,
It's a great way to include them in the process, and I bet they feel more of like a not ownership, but more of like she's my author because she listens to
yeah,
us
a
and all that sort of
connection.
thing.
Yeah, it is. It's great. Like I love that. And I'm a pretty introverted person, so that's a really accessible way for me to make connections, because things like book signings and book readings, I do them, but they're not my they're not my ideal scenario. And so being able to email and social media, those are much easier ways for me to connect with people.
I think I would probably imagine most writers are introverts. I know I am. Um,
Yeah,
and we're sitting in front of a computer for hours among hours. I know you said that you like to try to write about 4 books a year. If I'm
yeah,
lucky, I might hit that target. Usually it's around 3, but you're right. I mean, we spend so many hundreds of hours, if not thousands, every year sitting in front of a computer. And I think a lot of people, especially since we write horror, they think horror writers are crazy because it's like you're sitting there and you're coming up with weird stuff. And I don't really write gore into my novels too much, but everybody
I
always
do
thinks
that.
there's,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, hi, Tobe. My little doggy just stopped in.
Uh, Hi,
Hi.
Tobes.
Hi, little guy. He's actually, let's see if I can show him to everybody. There he is. And the reason
Oh,
I did that is because I actually wrote him into a number of my books.
oh,
Um,
awesome.
he was sort of like a sub. Oh, there, now he's ready to go. Okay, bye-bye.
He just needed his cameo.
I think so. I think he was feeling jealous. He wanted some on-screen attention. But
Yeah.
yeah, I actually wrote him into a few of my stories just because,
Oh,
the main character didn't really have anybody to chill with. And,
oh,
they're both experiencing these ghostly, you know, I don't know, appearances, presences, and so forth. And he's
yeah.
like checking things out, and she's like, "What's going on? What are you seeing in the corner?" I always kind of sometimes add dogs in and so forth because they can see
Yeah.
things that we can't.
Animals are great. Yes, they're perfect for that.
Do you have
Yeah,
any? Do you have any pets?
I do. We have 3 cats,
I was
and
gonna say you'd be a cat person. I just got
yeah,
that
I'm a
feeling.
cat. I'm a cat lady. But they do, yeah. I mean, they're very interesting. It's always slightly unnerving when you have any kind of an animal suddenly react to something that you didn't see or hear.
Mhm.
And I had a dog when I was little. I remember a girlfriend of mine and we did a Ouija board one night, and the dog got agitated, this little West Highland white that we had. And I can still remember thinking like, there's something about a reaction by an animal that's so much more unnerving than a reaction by your friend who's getting scared. The animal reacts and you're like, what can you see? What do you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah, I recently read a book called Suspect by Robert Crease. He's a mystery thriller writer. He did a great
Okay.
job talking about dogs and their sense of smell, hearing, and so forth. So dogs and cats are much more perceptive to what's going on in their environment than I think we are because they're
Yeah.
there all the time. We might be leaving to
Yeah.
go to work or go grocery shopping, but they're always there. So they're always aware, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. I-
So, looking back at what we talked about a little bit, which is, the paranormal, and talking about kind of stirring in some of the stories that you might get from readers, you also look at a lot of true crime. And I'm wondering, and this is sort of your thing. I mean, I'm not sure how many other writers have done this. I think it's a fantastic idea, meshing two totally different genres and sticking them together. And I think that's why you've
yeah.
been pretty successful. So, what about those two really made you think, hey, I should stick these two together and see what comes out?
Well, a lot of it is that those are just lifelong interests for me, both spaces. I've always been a, an avid reader of horror and paranormal and also of true crime. And even in my Northern Michigan Asylum series, there were characters in those books that were inspired by people I had encountered in true crime stories, and not it's a really warped and distorted path from like the kernel of the idea to the book. So there was a murder suicide in New Orleans years ago, right after Hurricane Katrina, and I remember laying in a bath actually one night watching this Dateline episode about this murder suicide, and it was called Graveyard Love. And I
Oh,
thought like
wow.
that would be a great like name for a book. It would be a great idea, but I thought of the woman being the murderer instead of the husband. And so
Okay.
then, nothing happens. And some long period of time later, I wrote and released Calling Back the Dead. And that, like the kernel of that book, which looks nothing at all like this true crime, came from that evening when I'm hanging out in my bathtub watching true crime. And so as I was finishing up the Asylum series, I was thinking, I need to segue into a new series. I'm really interested in the true crime. Around this time, I decided to start a true crime podcast
Hmm.
because, I did a lot of research on true crime, and I was like, maybe I should put this to use and start a podcast and actually cover crimes, try to find stuff that's not as covered and cover those. And so it just made sense to bring them together. They already felt like they were together. And and in some way I also think one of the things that I like is you have these stories, and most of them in my new novels, the true crime inspired novels, there's no ending. You never find out what happened. These people disappear and there's never any closure. So the I don't want to say fun, but the fulfilling thing about turning that into a novel is there is closure. There is an ending. Like I get to write a scenario where there's completion and where the person who was victimized usually gets to have their voice by appearing in spirit form in some sense and having their murder solved, or so that's part of it.
It's great. I mean, for me at least, writing paranormal, supernatural thrillers, horror novels, when I come up against, when I'm outlining a book and so forth, and I come up against a wall, and I'm like, how is this going to end? Or what do I do
Mhm.
what do I do here? It's leading up to something, but I'm not sure what it's going to be. And I don't get blocked for too long. And it's only
Yeah.
because I tell myself it's paranormal. Anything can happen. Do you feel that way?
Mhm.
Does that kind of inform some of your writing as well?
Yeah, I actually do not outline. So I'm
Okay.
very much like I think of, I don't know, is it Stephen King that calls it right into the dark or
Oh,
whatever.
that sounds
So
cool. Yeah.
yeah, right. It sounds cool. So I don't outline. I will sit down usually with one single scene and then I just start seeing where it takes me, and even the novel itself, it comes out as like 100 scenes that I then have to stitch together
Wow.
with transitions. It's a very uh it's a pain in the butt when it comes
Hmm.
to editing, because when I finish the rough draft, I'm like, I just have this mass of things that have happened. And now I have to put them in order. I mean, I've written them all out of order. It's all over the place. Um, but the paranormal thing is it's helpful because it always lends a something that doesn't have to be totally logical. It gives you a space where you can get information that no human being has learned in the novel. You have helpers. Like that's one of the things that I like about the paranormal aspect is you are getting help from the victims, and that's
Like you said,
interesting.
yeah, like you said, their voice is heard. I mean, everybody,
Yeah.
even when you're alive, you want to be heard and understood. I can only imagine what it must feel like for a ghost, for a spirit to be out there, waiting to come upon someone who, number one, can see them, and number two,
Yeah.
can hear them or communicate with them. So that
Yeah.
must be like a huge thing for them.
Yeah. And especially when you think about like I don't presume to know what happens after we're gone, but if whatever part of you might linger behind, if you die in a violent way, you might be able to let that go as an entity. But when you watch your family suffering and for years, trying to find answers and seeking justice, like to me, that's probably what really could hold someone here from in that inability to leave because they are tethered to the emotional pain of the people they loved and what they are searching for. And so to be able to, again, in spirit form, somehow bring justice, bring closure, might be freeing from a spiritual sense. It might be free.
Yeah. It's like their work is not done because their life was cut short for reasons that number one, they may not understand or they want someone else to understand. Yeah, as you can see, I kind of feel strongly about this. So I
Yeah.
totally believe in spirits, and I've had, situations that I've seen or heard and so forth.
Yeah.
I mentioned that to you in my initial email to you. Do you
Mhm.
have any paranormal experiences in your past?
I do. I do. I've had a few. I have one that I wrote about on my blog, and it was we called it the Cobbler's Nightmare Ghost. We had these cottages that my parents owned, and they were in northern Michigan in the Higgins Lake area. And there was a night, I don't know how old I was now, 9 or 10, but we had bunk beds in kind of the living room part of one of these cottages. We all slept in one cottage, and we had bunk beds, and my cousin and I were sleeping on the top bunk. And it was, it was winter. There was a wood burning stove going. So I just remember it being very hot and dark. And I woke up to this woman on top of me. I was laying on my stomach, and I could feel her almost like laying on top of me. And it seemed like there was blood pouring from her face, and she had long hair like draped over the back of my head.
Oh,
And she was saying, "Help me." And I woke up Jen, my cousin next to me, and I said, "Help her. Oh my God, help her." And Jen kind of like sat up and said, "What are you talking about?" And she wasn't there. There was nothing there. And now I have goosebumps talking about
totally.
it.
My face is
Right?
goosebumps. I'm like,
Yeah. And it was night, and I was young, and it's dark, and again the heat from the wood burner. I remember just sitting there for a while afterwards thinking, like, was that a dream? Like, except I'm a really vivid dreamer. There is a distinct difference between dreams and having a waking experience. You're not in the room you're in. You're not sleeping next to the person you're next to. You're not so I felt that this was a ghost, the ghost of a woman. And then um and then several other family members had experiences in the months that followed. So probably for the next 4 or 5 months, my dad one night was sitting in this cottage, and he was there alone watching TV, and he looked up to see a woman looking through the window at him, and she had long dark hair, and she was wearing what he described as a nightgown. And he thought that she needed help. He thought it was a neighbor or something coming over looking for help. So he got up and went outside, and there was no one there. And he I remember him later saying, maybe we were in a place where like something could slip through, almost like a portal. And this is interesting because he was a pretty no nonsense kind of guy. He was not a superstitious person. He was not someone who, regularly talked about those things. Once in a while he'd tell us stories from when he was young, weird things that had happened. And then my sister one night was sitting in that cottage and looked out, and we had another cottage right next to us that we also owned, and we called it the kids' cottage. And no one was in there because it had like old floors and no furniture. And she saw a woman looking out of the window in that cottage into the one we were in. And she didn't investigate. It scared her. She was like 11 years old. And then I think the last thing that had happened was my mom one night had gotten up to use the bathroom, and there was a window, like the toilet and then a window, and there was a curtain over it, but the motion detector came on. So we had a motion detector light on our garage, and it came on. And, she's assuming it's an animal, but then she sees the silhouette of a person pass in front of the window. And this is weird because where our cottage was, right on the other side, there was a fence, and then a huge yard that went to a neighbor's house. So it wasn't a thoroughfare. There wasn't any reason someone would be walking by. And it spooked my mom. So she woke up my dad and said, "There's somebody outside." And he said, "It's fine. It's an animal. Go back to bed." So she went back to bed, but she said she laid there and was like, I'm going to show him tomorrow because we'd had a fresh snow that day and he'll be able to see these footprints in the snow.
Huh?
But then there were no footprints.
Of
And
course.
so then she was convinced, right, that it was the cobbler's nightmare ghost. And
Huh.
yeah, so it was just a weird, and it never happened again after that. It
Hmm.
was like this one period of 4 or 5 months maybe, and then nothing ever again.
Hmm. I'm just thinking because your story, which sounded completely terrifying, and you should put it in a book. I know you said you blogged about it, but you should put it in a
Yeah,
book. Um,
yeah,
that seemed to be very similar to what, I think you said your grandfather, was it, or your father who saw
my
it through the,
dad.
yeah. So seeing that, I'm wondering if it was the same person. Do you think it could have been?
I mean, that's what we all thought. We all
Yeah.
thought it was probably a woman there. And my sister and I were both 10 or 11, and we had a bunch of cousins that lived around there and would come over, and we were all convinced that some woman was murdered here. And and I mean, I did actually look into it at one point because I had told someone else about the story, and I kind of looked to see, was there ever anyone that disappeared in that area that was never found? I never found anything,
Huh.
but yeah, we did wonder if it was the same person.
Hmm.
And how do you know? How do you ever know?
Yeah. Yeah, you don't. So now that you shared, I feel I have to share too.
Yeah, share.
So, and this has happened in my home. We've just noticed things, sounds, sometimes a voice, mostly, images. So my
Okay.
dog, even to this day, he looks in certain parts of the house and just looks up and stares for
Oh
long
wow.
periods. It's like, what is this guy doing? My sister had
Yeah.
come over to watch him one time while we went off on a vacation, and she brought one of those EMP. I'm not sure if that's what it's called. Do you watch Supernatural, the TV show?
I don't.
Okay. Well, there's a machine that these guys, the Winchesters, the brothers, the main characters walk around
Okay.
with, and they can detect sometimes if there's spectral
Yeah. Is
activity.
it EMF? Is it an EMF
Maybe that's what it is.
detector?
Electromagnetic field. I don't know what.
Field force? Yeah, I do
Yeah.
know what you're talking about though.
Yeah. So, my sister got this from like a ghost hunter who'd go to all these different locations, and she would, turn it on and it would actually pick up activity in the same space as my dog was always looking,
Oh,
which,
that's interesting.
yeah. So the next one that I had was, I think it was last year, probably in March. It just started getting a little bit warmer after the winter. It was probably around 42 degrees, and I was taking my dog for a walk, 1 o'clock in the
Mhm.
afternoon. So it wasn't really sunny, but it was sort of overcast, as you normally get in the
Okay.
Midwest. And it was just the strangest thing. I happened to look over at a house, and there was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, standing on the porch, just one step
Okay.
on the porch. She's wearing a princess outfit, and that's it. And she's just standing there looking at me, and it's 42 degrees on. I have a winter jacket on. And,
Yeah.
my dog has his winter coat, the one that nature gave him. But here's this little girl who's just standing there. And I'm
Yeah.
just walking. I'm like, that's really weird. So I'm walking and I'm just keep staring at her because I'm like, you need a jacket. It's freezing out because the wind chill was probably like another 10 degrees. So it's around freezing out there. So I'm still
Yeah.
looking at her like, "Oh, weird." And she happens to move. But when I started walking, I saw her image through the car windshield. And while I'm seeing that, I'm looking at her body moving like this. And it was just so freaky. It was just so
Whoa.
freaky to me. I was just, I mean, this little girl, she's 6 years old, and I'm 45 at this time, and I was scared. I was like
Wow.
walking quickly with my dog, just stare, and I
Yeah.
was I was just staring at her and walking away to make sure she didn't attack me. Like really, a 6-year old's gonna attack me, wearing a princess outfit. But that I don't know. I've every time I walk by that house now, and I still do just to see her, I've never seen her again. Um,
Okay. I was going to say, have you ever seen her again? This a little girl that lives in the house? It's
Yeah.
not, as far as I know.
Yeah. I I walk by that house probably twice a week over the past year and a half, and nothing. Not once have I seen that
Wow.
girl. And it just scary. But the most recent one, and this will be a really quick one, happened about a week and a half ago. I was sitting on the couch watching TV. My wife was in the room I'm in right now doing some exercises on the floor with my dog
Mhm.
right next to him. My dog seems to be near all of these. Like maybe he's bringing these ghosts. I don't know. But I'm in the other room, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this black shadow pass by the hallway. And my wife goes, "Did you see that?" She's in a completely different room. She's on the floor. She can't even know what I'm doing over there. And I was like, "What are you
Yeah.
talking about?" And she said, "I just saw a black shadow in the hallway." And then I just didn't respond. I was just like, "I think I saw," and then now I'm like trying to like turn myself, "No, you didn't really see it." I'm like, I'm pretty sure I saw it
Yeah.
before I saw it before she mentioned it. But I'm like, no, that couldn't have been. So yeah.
It is. It is really unnerving when you, and I think we are really good at talking ourselves out of it. Like I think if we were really open, we would probably realize we perceive a lot of strange things. But what's interesting is when you allow yourself to think, that was a ghost, that was something supernatural. It's kind of scary. And so you shut it down like, no, that's not what it was. It was a shadow from a car. It was the dog. You find a way to justify it.
Mhm.
But
Yeah. And in this instance, the curtains were closed. There's no way a shadow would have been there. And that's not
yeah.
and I actually have a story that I actually, or like a history of something that I actually included in my novel, The Descendants. I know a reader was
Okay.
telling me, I wanted to find out what the story was. Why did he call it The Descendants? What does
Yeah.
it have to do with anything? And it's sort of based on a true story that I actually describe at the end of the book. So if you're listening to this or watching this, don't go to the end of the book first. Read the book and then find out what the true aspect of it was. I promise it'll be there.
And this is like a paranormal experience that you had that
Yeah.
that you wrote into the book. Okay.
Yes, yeah, something my wife mentioned to me, and when I went to see a psychic, she told me a little bit about my past history and my
Okay.
family and what may have
Oh.
happened, generations before, and I did some research and so forth. So, and
Okay.
I was just like, I was the oldest of four children. I always had to watch my brother and sisters and take them places and do things for them. So I'm just going to make basically myself as the main character. And of course, he was into architecture. You got to change things up and so forth.
Yeah.
But he meets a girl that's really cute, and I like the actor, not the actress, the character that I created. So, oh yeah, I'll be dating her when I'm 17 years old. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's dorky stuff that authors do. Um,
Yes.
but you were saying earlier, now to get out of that, just to jump back in, you were saying that Stephen King was a big inspiration for you. What about his works made you so wrapped up, got you so wrapped up and made you kind of want to write in that genre?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to explain on some level. I mean, I was always a big reader. I loved horror when I was young. I mean, even before I was reading Stephen King, I was reading R.L. Stein's Fear Street and Christopher Pike. And
Mhm.
my dad was a Stephen King reader. And I think I picked up my first book around 11 or 12, Rose Matter. And I just loved it. Like it transported me. I was in the book. I was so immersed, I think, in a way that I have never been. And I was already such a lover of books and story. And he is so skilled at putting you into the mind of the person that he is writing from the point of view of. And I don't know, one of the things that I think about is that he just writes really accessible, real people. he doesn't, you know, something that can be difficult in, like, I do like fantasy. I've read, you know, some fantasy, but a lot of times you have these really extraordinary characters, or these characters that are, you know, so down on their luck, and then they find out they have this supernatural ability. But when you read Stephen King, it's just some, you know, regular guy going about his business, and then he is suddenly cast into this totally insane reality that looks like every day. And I just think it's so relatable that you read his novels and it is as if you have lived the life that he wrote in that book, and then you step out of it and you're yourself again. And
Yeah.
it's bizarre. But yeah, I don't know, I don't even know how to put words to what it is that hooked me with him when I was young. But how many millions of people have also experienced it, right? Like
Yeah,
through, you know,
hundreds.
that.
Yeah, and it has to be, like you said, the characters, because, like, for instance, I was telling another author that was on the show a while back about my experience with the book It, and how much,
Yeah,
I was like, I want something to happen, but then, I realized after so long I've been, you know, tracing these characters' lives, and I know them better than I know anybody. I mean, even better than
your best friend.
myself. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's almost, I mean, it's like you're intruding on this person's personal space in a way that I don't think, and I think that's why he's so good. He puts so relatable characters, and he'll just add
mhm.
an element of horror, and it's like you're just struck like, oh my God, it's terrifying. And it's interesting because when I first
Yeah,
started writing horror, there was another author who had said, "Oh, horror readers, they don't really care about characters. They just want to see blood and guts." And I thought about that for a few days. I was like, "Do they really?" And everything I look back at, all of the studying and all of the reading I've done, I was like, "No. This person, she writes fantasy, urban fantasy, I believe it was." So
okay.
she just had a myopic vision of what horror readers really preferred and
Yeah,
appreciated. So she's wrong. And it's interesting, you have to kind of trust yourself sometimes when you're taking advice from people as to whether that's true or not. Because without the characters Stephen King that created, his books would probably not be as well sold and as well loved as they are.
no,
So
yeah, it would be a
yeah.
totally different experience. I think there is, you know, I think there exists an element of horror, like kind of the, like the idea of the slasher flick or whatever. If you think of Friday the 13th, or um oh, Nightmare on
Nightmare
Elm
on Elm
Street.
Street. Yeah.
Like there's, you know, there was a period in time where I think we were on some level drawn to, like, the
The
worst
bad
case
guy.
scenario, so that you could sit and feel safe, like, oh, thank God I'm not in the middle of that. But even in those, you're not rooting for the villain to slash and maim more people. You're rooting for that one character that you've come to relate to, like, to escape him, to get away, like to make it to the end. And I think that's really what draws us to horror, is that the reality of life is there, it kind of is horror. We're all going to die. Like there's no getting out of here alive. So
Mm.
when we can watch or read an experience that really takes us up against kind of our deepest, darkest fears, and then something prevails, even if there is no happy ending, there's an ending, and there's something that happens within us when we can go through that whole process and see, okay, like, it's, this can happen and it's okay, and I can come out on the other side, and I can set this book down and return to my mundane life that also is gonna at some point come to an end.
Mhm.
Hopefully a peaceful one, but at the end of the day, it's, you know, there, we're all marching towards death at some point, and there's an element of horror in that.
Yeah, yeah. The moment we're born, we're, already
Beginning to death.
Yeah, which sounds really twisted and
It does.
disturbing and disappointing. But you know, it started out there with the slashers. It started with us identifying with like the lead character, and then it actually, as you continued with the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Streets 4, 5, 6, it did become where people actually wanted Jason to kill people. And I think that's
Oh,
when,
really?
yeah, I didn't go that far. I think I stopped at
I'll
Nightmare on
watch
Elm
them.
Street 5, and I think I
Oh,
stopped at Friday the 13th Part 2. And I never saw
okay.
past Halloween 2 in the 70s and early 80s. But
Yeah.
that's when it took off, and everyone was like, "Yeah, kill him, Jason! Kill him, Michael! Freddy, go!"
Uh,
And then it's just started like a campy type, the villain making like Arnold Schwarzenegger gags and one-liners and
yeah.
stuff like that. But I guess
Oh,
she
man.
really had to go after he killed her, or something like that. But yeah, and then they had to switch the type of horror because it was no longer horrific. It was, let's laugh at the bad guy killing everybody. So
Yeah.
they had to eventually go back and remake, Halloween, which I think they've done a fantastic job. Have you seen that one? The
I
newest one?
haven't. So wait,
Oh,
is the newest one is a remake of the original Halloween?
you know what? It's I misspoke. It's actually they're pretending that after Halloween, the original, none of the other
Mhm.
films happened. It's now what,
Okay.
40 years later, and the one that Jamie Lee Curtis did recently is the second one, even though she'd already had a
Oh,
second one. But yeah, I would totally recommend you see the original
oh,
and then watch the
okay.
recent one if you like slasher
Yeah, I
films.
loved the original, and I think I watched almost all of the earlier sequels, and then I watched, was it Halloween H2O or
Yeah,
something?
yeah, I thought it was decent back then.
Yeah, and was Jamie Lee in that one? I was
Yes.
thinking they brought her back for that. Okay, and
Yeah.
but so now there's a new one. Everything else is gone except the original and this new one. I'll have to check it out.
And
That sounds
then the new one will
good.
be coming out at Halloween, the sequel to the one that Jamie Lee Curtis just did. So
Oh,
so
okay.
you'll be on track to, really go through these pretty quickly then.
Yeah. All right. That sounds good. I just watched the second Conjuring finally. I want to see the third one now, but I
Wow.
haven't.
What'd
I
you think
haven't
of the
done.
second one? Did you think it was better
I
than the
really
first one?
liked it.
You didn't?
I
You didn't like it?
No, I did. I
Oh,
really
okay.
liked it. I don't know if I thought it was better than the first one. I saw the first one a few years ago, so, but
Hmm.
I saw it in a theater, and I remember jumping out of my seat and being
Yeah.
scared a bunch of times. This one I watched, alone in my house, so that adds its own element of scariness. But I did really like it. I thought, yeah, the nun demon thing was definitely
Awesome.
scary. Awesome. Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Have you seen the new one? The Devil Made Me Do It, that one?
I did. I did. I didn't like it nearly as much as the first two. I
Uh,
thought it was good, but they changed some elements in the story. And the
okay.
the the director of the first two, he'd originally written the first two. This one he just supplied a story for and had,
Uh,
some screenwriters. So they changed the formula a little bit, which makes sense.
okay.
They want to try to keep things fresh, I'm sure. But and
Yeah.
like I said, I did enjoy it. I think there could have probably been about 20 minutes taken out of it. It was just getting kind of slow. I
Okay.
I was getting tired at one point, and I was like, really? The first two I love so much. They're like two of my favorite horror movies. I was just like,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah.
But I do have a couple more questions for you. Normally,
Okay.
we kind of hit our limit, but we talked about our own paranormal issues and stuff like that. So that took up a bunch of space. I do want to get to your most recent series, though. Um, gosh, the Troubled Spirits, which
Yeah.
which I liked because I have one called Sinister Spirits. So I'm all
Oh,
down for Troubled Spirits too.
yeah.
Um, how does that kind of differ from your Northern Michigan Asylum series?
Well, the structure is similar. I mean, I tend to, and I say that, but I guess if you read them, you might not feel that way.
Hmm.
With the Northern Michigan Asylum series, obviously they were all connected by the asylum, and
Right.
then there was sort of this underlying brotherhood of doctors who experimented on and were interested in patients with paranormal abilities. So in every single book, you would see that come up somewhere. In these books, they're totally standalone. They're each inspired by a true crime. So the first one was inspired by the case of Heather Teague. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it was she was a woman who was abducted from the Ohio River, and it was a really disturbing case because what had happened was this guy was on vacation with his wife, went up to his condo and was looking through a telescope across the Ohio River, and he sees this pretty woman on an isolated beach sunbathing. And as he is watching, this bearded man comes out of the woods, grabs her by the hair, and drags her into the woods, and she's never seen again.
Killing.
So this is the true story. And so when I, encountered that years ago, it stuck in my mind, as these things do. And so it was immediately the first book in this series, because it was probably the most disturbing unsolved true crime I had ever come across as a woman. I can't think of a worst case scenario. So these all have some kind of murder mystery at the heart because they're inspired by a true crime, but then they also have the larger paranormal story around that, which either means the victim is in some way communicating with the characters in the story, or some other victims of a crime are communicating. So yeah, I guess that would be the long explanation.
Okay. All right. So when going through these, because I know you have one that'll be coming out, your fourth one will be coming out toward the end of the year.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're looking for? Because I know, like you said, it's all kind of based on true stories. How do you know when you hit on a true story, they're like, oh yeah, that has to be in my next book?
Um, I don't necessarily. So sometimes what will happen is there'll just be, again, like a scene. So the scene for the first one was, my main character is going to be looking through a telescope and he's going to witness this happening. So that scene stuck with me. I think one of the things that makes for a compelling true crime that can be turned into a novel is there just has to really be a big element of mystery around that case, and some level of strangeness. I think something that causes it to embed itself in your mind and not go away. And like the last one, Darkness Stirring, it was loosely inspired by the story of Bella in the Witch Elm. Have you heard of that before? It
I'm
happened
not sure. It sounds a little familiar.
Yeah, probably. It's a pretty well covered case, and essentially this woman was these boys were playing in the woods. They climbed up into this tree called the Witch Elm, and already, just if you see a picture of this tree, it inspires a scary story, because this tree was warped and weird and had branches coming off every direction. And it was because it had gone through a process called coppicing, where you like hack at the tree and it causes it to grow weird. But if you see this tree, and it's called a witch elm, I mean, there's just on so many levels already, it lends itself to a story. And then these kids are looking for eggs and they find a human skull. And when investigators come out, they find the entire skeleton of a woman that has been shoved down into the hollow of this tree. And it's an unsolved case to this day. It happened in the 1940s. It's still unsolved. And one of the theories that arose around that case, there was a relatively well-respected anthropologist who said this death looks like a witch sacrifice. And
Huh.
this woman wrote about witches in England, and she believed there had been sort of like an ancient, I don't want to say civilization, but an
Yeah.
ancient group
Group.
of witches. And she
Yeah.
believed that the woman in the witch elm had potentially been a witch who was sacrificed. And the idea was that she was encased in an elm because it would contain her spirit so she couldn't seek revenge.
Huh.
So, you hear a
That sounds
story like
awesome.
that and you're immediately like, it could go so many places. And so
Yeah.
that's part of it. You hear the story and it's so intriguing that it stays in your mind. And then you find yourself thinking about a character, and suddenly that the two come together, and that's where the book begins, I guess.
Cool. Yeah, the reason I ask a lot of these questions, and for all of our, all of our viewers and listeners out there, I often, I'll get a guest on the show, and what I want to find out is something that, that you might want to know, about not like, how do you get your, where do you come up with your ideas? Because everybody always asks that. It's never for
Yeah.
writers, it's like, I have no idea. It just formed, and then I wrote it down, and something else came, and something else, and I added more, and most of the time we just don't know. But if what I try to do is try to ask questions in a different way to draw out all of our guests to try to come up with something, and that was fantastic, and that sounds really good. And you said was that the fourth one or the third one that
That's
in
the
your
third one, Dark
third one?
Mystery.
Man, I have to
Yeah,
get those.
that's
I
the
love the
third one.
covers of your books, but yeah,
Oh,
those
thank you.
yeah. Did you do them yourself? Is that what you're like? Oh,
No,
oh,
so
okay.
um,
You're like, I'm an
am
awesome
I
artist.
Blart?
I know. What can I
I
say?
know. I wish I did them myself. No, M.I. Blart, I think is their name. They're
Oh, I
awesome.
use them. I've used them.
You
Yeah,
do?
they are very
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
They did
Yeah.
they just did one of my new ones. And I
Okay.
gave them an idea, and I told them, this is what I want you to do. And they knocked it out of the park on the first try. I've never ever had any other artist do that. It's my
Yeah.
favorite book, and it'll be coming out in I think 2 weeks. So I'm really
Oh,
looking
awesome.
forward to it.
What's it
But
called?
this one is called In the Night. So the
In the
first one
Night.
is In the Shadows. This one's In the Night, and the third one, which will be out right before Halloween, will be called In the Dark. So
Ooh, I like it.
of course, yeah, because
Yeah.
that's where I live my life, in the dark.
Yeah. Hey.
That's all of us sitting in front of computers. But uh,
Exactly.
so we've been on for quite a bit. I'm gonna the last question I have is I try to kind of leave it up to all of my guests to kind of maybe bring up something that maybe none of the readers might know about, or anybody who doesn't really know about you, for instance, who might be watching this, who's a fan of someone else who I've had on the show. Is there anything out there that you would like to any of your readers or any potential readers to know about you, about your writing or anything?
Oh, wow. Geez, that's a hard, hard question on some level. Well, so one thing I would say is, and some of my readers do know this because I send a newsletter and talk about things, but I teach yoga and I meditate, and I am a person who I'm like an eternal optimist. I
Great.
really believe strongly in the afterlife, in kind of the infinite possibilities of our reality. And I think a lot of times people do see horror writers as people who are, you're always thinking these dark things, but I think the reality is that there is a lot of like light and optimism and hope that happens in horror and in the scary dark things. Like it's pushing through that scary dark thing to get to the hope. And so I think about that sometimes, that is something that people who know me know that, but people who read my books, they probably think I'm a creepy weirdo living in a dungeon somewhere, and mostly I am not. So
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for that insight. Thank you, Jackie, so much for coming on the show. I thought this was fantastic. I really enjoyed
It
our
was.
conversation. All right.
Yes, for you.
All right. Hopefully we'll see you next time. Take care.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kirk.
Thank you.